Welcome everybody to the, what is it, April? Is this April?
It is April.
Are we still in April?
It's still
Okay.
April.
24th.
Okay, yeah, alright, so April's webcast, we're going to be talking about developers, development, all the other dev-related D words that you can come up with. I don't know. How many variants of developer are there?
Engineer, software engineer, software architect. Ooh, keep on going for hours.
Yeah. Alright. And I will say, this has been a really fun process, engaging with all the folks you see here at the table, because I myself, as many of you know, I am not a developer. I am a PM, so I have learned many things over the course of this process, and chatting with everybody, talking about features, and I mean, just with you this morning, Jill, I was asking random questions on code compiling and all this kind of fun stuff, and how do I output executables, and I'm going to re-ask you those questions so we can tell everybody else this fun stuff. But let's go ahead and bring up the presentation. As usual, we've got a PowerPoint we'll be walking through to demonstrate some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. There will be a few demos done. But let me go ahead and show you some of the cool stuff. So you have seen this before. I don't know how many webcasts we've done where I've brought this up. But it's the Windows development lifecycle, right? Where we have release planning, and it goes over to engineering systems where the code gets built into Windows. Then we go through and we have flighting, which all of you are very, very familiar with because you always ask us where the new builds are. Deployment, obviously, that's when the builds show up on your machine. Then, of course, insiders do the things that they are awesome at, just like we do internally, where we're testing the builds, seeing what's happening, what's going on. And then, of course, there's the feedback cycle. But in looking at this, the question stands, well, where are the developers, right? And that's actually a really good question because in this representation, there's an assumption that there's developers involved, but they're not necessarily well called out. So I've modified the diagram. Hey, look, there's developers present now. It's pretty cool. But now it looks like they're just standing aside. So let's actually revise the process. And this is actually where developers come in. So both out of release planning as well as the the feedback cycle for current builds, developers are involved. Some developers look at feedback directly. Some of them have a team process, which we've mentioned before, where it's the community champs, where they go through and process and promote to bugs and things like that. Again, it's very team specific within Microsoft as to how that gets done. But developers are involved both in the turning feedback into awesome code that gets to you, both via the release planning process, whether it's something new that's coming out in another iteration, or fixing stuff in a current cycle where there was unintended bugs or things of that nature that may have happened. Are people having trouble hearing me?
Yeah.
We can move
You're
the
you're
microphone
you're
back
focusing.
to you.
You're
I'm
Talking
looking
to
that
the
way.
the screen, not
I will
the
just do
microphone.
this. Turn this.
But then there was one person who said it was better than any of the other webcasts. So the audience is confused.
Meaning not being able to hear Jason.
It's
Could be.
a webcast where nobody has to listen to me talk. It's like my dream webcast. I'm just gonna sit back over here and be like, hey, how's it going? So before I go too much further into this, right? There's a bunch of new faces at the table. Some old faces. Yeah, Brandon's here again. Hi, Brandon. But you don't have a slide. There's no slide that says that you're Brandon. But yeah, nice shirt. Show it for the camera. There you go. Scoot back a little bit. There you go. That's Brandon's
lean in.
attitude
There
for
you
today, right? So, well, although folks are at the table are not sitting in presentation order, which is totally fine. Stacy, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Stacy Durr. I'm a software engineer lead in charge of the desktop bridge, which helps get Win32 apps in the store.
Awesome. Clint?
Hi, I'm Clint Ruckus. Been at Microsoft for 10 years. God, it's been that long. I help create Windows Template Studio, which is the fastest way to create a file new for UWP applications. And I help out Windows development for basically getting the word out and talking about it. So, for example, I'm helping lead all the sessions for build for Windows and Office.
That's awesome. That's a lot of responsibility.
It's, I think right now, 152 individual content types for sessions that I'm responsible for right now. So I
Please tell me
literally,
you
I
have
kid
some
you not,
help.
Webcast, I literally showed up 1 minute before this started because that's how crazy my schedule was right now.
That is absolutely true. I'm glad you could make it, amongst other things. Chigusa?
Yeah, I'm Chigusa Sansen. I'm a program manager for Zamo platform team, and I'm also part of the Fluent design system group. I'm one of the core that also drive the Fluent directions as well as communicating in and out of the company. So I will be presenting at the build one of the topics that Clint's
Yeah, so Chikuza
handling.
is one of the speakers for Fluent Design. She'll have a session with Tim Allen, and that's going to be fantastic.
See, this is one of the fun things. Is all the time we constantly get asked, when is Fluent going to show up in more applications, more pieces of the Windows Core OS, things like that. And it sounds like you're actually the right person that people need to talk to. I mean, through the feedback hub, of course, right? I don't want people trying to dig up your home phone number. You're like, oh, where is Fluent in the feedback hub, Anna?
But that will be one of the wonderful topics that will be discussed in Chikuza's session with Tim, and then there's multiple other Fluent related sessions at Build as well. I believe the schedule builder went live today, just slightly earlier ago. So yeah, it's going to be fantastic. I can't wait for your session. Massive, wonderful little bits of information about Fluent will be discussed there.
Yep.
I'm going to go to your session.
Everybody should.
I too am going to go to the session.
Will you be at your own session?
I hope so.
And actually,
Somebody's got to present it, right?
one of the other great things about Build is all the sessions will be live for online viewers, roughly 24 hours after they've been on site. So even if you can't attend Build with the 6,000 other developers, you can watch this as well. And we're working on creating in-person or online experiences for if you can attend to help kind of virtualize that experience as well.
I'm actually going to make you repeat all this later because I have an entire section on Build that I'm going to talk about.
Son of a biscuit.
I didn't want to stop you because you had a good thing going. Peter.
Hi, my name's Peter Tor. I'm a program manager lead. I'm on the internationalization globalization team in Windows. So just before the webcast, we were talking about Japanese eras, for example. But my team deals with time zones, calendars, date time formatting, resource management, stuff like that. But I also have a lot of history with things like API design in Windows and stuff like that. And also, I'm wearing a t-shirt today as well. It says I'm a varsity computer science teacher for TEALS. So everybody should get into TEALS. If you like computer science, you know computer science, and you want to help high school kids learn, please go to TEALS, k12.org.
Awesome.
We have another TEALS teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh, is that actually the natural transition to the next slide?
It is. Look at that. It's almost like we planned it.
That was pretty good. Yeah, so I'm another TEALS. I'm actually a TA with TEALS. So teaching over video chat to high school students. But that's not my main job. That's just for fun. I'm actually a software engineer on the Feedback Hub. I've been at Microsoft about 1.5 years. So I'm on kind of the side of the Feedback Hub that you guys don't normally get to see, which is like once we get all the feedback, what happens with it. So yeah,
Magic
magic.
happens.
Basically magic, and then things get fixed.
Magic. Wait. Magically, things get fixed.
Yeah. Well, at least right now, but later in the webcast, they'll see more about how that happens.
Yeah. So
stay tuned.
anybody wants to know about the magically gets fixed part of things, you can go back and watch. I think it was the October webcast that was about Feedback Hub and the whole triage process and all of that.
I'll give a sneak preview today.
Oh.
Or not. Oh no, not sneak preview. To some, like a actual. I don't want to get people excited, but a quick run through.
I'll get
Okay.
excited, but not that excited.
Just
It'll be
a, just
good
a little
run.
excited.
Yeah. Turn it up. Just
No, we're not turning to 11 here.
No,
Just- okay.
not yet.
Okay.
Well,
Jill.
hi, my name is Jill Bender. I am a software engineer in Azure IoT, so I am our cloud representative today. There is not much magic to what I do because it is all open source, and you can go and look at a lot of the work that I do online right now. Hopefully, people aren't doing that right now because I'm embarrassed.
I'm doing code reviews for you right now.
Yeah, I've also been involved in the Microsoft Explore internship program, which is for freshmen and sophomores in college.
Awesome.
Can you tell us about the cat?
Yeah, so there's
Yeah.
a cat in the picture. Like,
Yes,
that's
that
bonus
is-
points automatically.
That is a very snuggly cat. Not technically my cat, but I love that cat.
Do its eyes point the
And-
same direction?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry. It was just a very important question I needed answered.
You know, they are, I
adds
will
character.
say, they are symmetrical,
Okay.
but they are not really going in a forward direction all the time.
I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like to have other people's pets and pictures of mine. So my GitHub profile is with a dog that I don't own. So
Okay.
yeah,
You get all the benefits of having pets,
Yeah.
but none of the responsibility.
yeah. Hashtag
good.
not my cat.
I know.
None of the cleanup after the fact.
Yeah.
That's the important part. All right, so what are we actually going to talk about today? Besides the cross-eyed cats and
Not cross-eyed.
they're not completely straight.
Yeah.
Super cute.
What did I do to my presentation? Okay, here we go. So we're going to talk about getting started with development. Of course, it'll be an overview of what developing is, the process of becoming a developer, tools and the development environment, then continual development. So some important Microsoft projects we're working on, which is why we have some of the awesome presenters here today who know a whole lot more than I do about this stuff, which is why I always have guests on the show to get to show off their hard work and their prowess of the things that they put their heart and souls into every day. We will talk about some design principles, and then of course, new and continuing education. One of the big things is for people that aren't developers is finding out how to get started. So we've compiled a long list of learning sources, different websites and ways to go and figure out how to get started with development, what the process look like, different languages and things like that. And then of course there are also some different resources if you are already a developer, things you probably already know about depending on how far into the field you are, but consider it like a level 201 type set of links. Then of course, as always, we'll be taking Q&A. If you have questions that are related to the topic at hand from any of the discussion that's going on, please type them in the chat. If relevant, we will address them kind of along the fly. Otherwise, we'll probably hold them until the end. But Brandon, as usual, could ask you to help compile some of those questions.
I've compiled some, but yeah, if you guys can just keep a lot of the questions for the end, it'll help us quite a bit.
Uh-oh. I just saw somebody talking about ruining Harry Potter in the
I know.
chat. I don't even want to read
What?
what that's about because it's
No,
just going to make me have a bad
No,
day.
someone asked me not to spoil Avengers Infinity War, and then someone replied back, Dumbledore dies. So there's some nerd jokes happening.
Wait, Dumbledore.
They're mixing different fandoms for funniness. It's
Just roll with it.
Yeah. The dog lives. Don't worry.
No pets were injured in the making of this PowerPoint, right?
yeah, Lassie's still around.
So, developers. So what is a developer? I know everybody's favorite resource on the internet is Wikipedia, right? Not really. So I actually looked up the definition of a software developer, and I'm going to read this just because it's hilarious. A software developer is and I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, that's entirely too long. A software developer is a person concerned with the facets of software development process, including the research, design, programming, and testing of computer software. Other job titles, and this is what's funny, as Clem was listing earlier, with similar meanings are program, software analyst, software engineer. I won't list all the rest of them. And then it goes on to somebody who's super smart trying to make some decisions about what it actually means. So, for those of you that are devs, I'm going to ask you a question. What does it mean to be a developer, like, to you? Like, from your perspective of what you do day in and day out, like, what does it mean to be a dev?
I know. I make things. I make things with software.
Yeah. Make apparent magic happen.
There it is.
Not actually magic, but it feels like it.
It feels like magic.
I think that's when you know you did it well.
And
Yeah.
it feels like
Yeah.
magic.
Oh, and it can go very, very wrong. So,
Oh yeah.
Sometimes that's magic too.
Yeah.
Like, how did it get
Wow.
so bad? Magic.
Good intentions going wrong, right?
Yeah, solving hard problems.
I mean, come on.
Sometimes they're
But
hard.
Just because
I
the
would
computer
challenge
doesn't
that.
boot, that's not a problem, really.
Okay.
But I think,
Diagnosing.
Well, it's not your problem.
I think part of being a software engineer,
That's
though,
my
is
team's
making a hard thing simple. And it's
I
literally
like that.
part of it is the solution is elegant and simple, but then you're making something very complex into manageable segments of work. So it's like when you were growing up, crossing the street. Crossing the street was the scariest thing possible. Now you don't even think about it because in your head you know exactly your pattern that you have to do. So you know that you have to in the U.S. you look left, then you look right, then you look left again, and then if all the scenario, if the speed of traffic is in your favor, you cross. If you're in other parts of the country, the world, you look right first. And that's part of software development is making hard problems, breaking them down into manageable bits. I mean, the stuff you do, like that would make me cry in a fetal position.
Well, come on, you're assuming something. No, a lot of it is also being able to deal with frustration. There are lots of people who are smart enough and have the skills, but they don't like pounding their head against the wall a whole bunch of times over and over until the wall finally breaks or you find some way around it.
Or you realize there was a semicolon where there shouldn't have been one.
I wish. Those are the easy ones. Those are the ones that are really hard when you're first learning programming, and then those aren't the hard ones.
I would say once you learn the tooling, that helps solve lots of problems like that.
Yeah. I will say I just started taking my first JavaScript course on Code Academy.
Woo!
Woo! Yay!
Yay.
I mean, everybody's got to start somewhere, right? And the thing is like they're like, okay, we're gonna do this, and it gives you the blank slate of where you got to start typing the code at, and it's like, wait, what was that thing I was supposed to type? It was like something dot something, and that calls the print function, and it's like trying to remember all that stuff. Like the amount of like just construct that ends up in the heads of people who code. Like I don't. Like, it boggles me.
Tools help.
The
Yeah.
tooling,
Like especially when the autofill, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and for one day he was like, "Hey, what does this mean?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but I can look it up." I wasn't the most helpful.
Plus, cut and paste from other people's code is a core dev skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
So I made a funny slide that I'm gonna show everybody. And this is total sarcasm, right? But I had to insert some funny memes into this presentation somewhere. I always just say developers turn calories into code because, you know, like I know that the little bit of coding that I have done, every single time that I've been doing it, I've been eating, whether it was snacking on M&Ms or something else, right? So,
Yeah. You make yourself feel better about it by calling it brain fuel, but
yeah, it's really it's not doing me any good. Like,
well, you could be eating carrots versus cake. I mean,
what about carrot cake?
Ooh.
it counts as both.
Hey,
Yeah.
there you
Not
go.
I
enough
was expecting
caffeine.
a clever pun.
No.
So this slide, right? This is kind of a fandom slide for developers, right? But it's really true when you stop and think about the things that developers actually accomplish on a daily basis. They take the ideas and suggestions both from internal folks here at Microsoft, right? And I'm speaking about Microsoft obviously because that's where we work. But I mean, you can scale this up to individual devs who write applications that you as insiders may use every day. Versus other full-blown software development companies. They turn ideas and suggestions into solutions. Some of that's feedback from insiders here at Microsoft. Obviously, some of it's new features and things that we roll out. They enable others to do and learn. Like we were talking about, the TEALS program earlier, right? Being mentors and sponsors and getting other people excited and involved and, developing in this particular field. They have the ability to impact people all around the world, including people they've never met. As a side tangent, that's one of the really fun things about my job is there are tons of insiders around the globe that I will never have the chance to meet personally, but I get to interact with them on Twitter or in the Answers forum or even in the Feedback Hub. But looking at it from a developer perspective, oftentimes it feels a bit behind the scenes because they're writing the code that changes Windows, but they're never going to meet all of the hundreds of millions of users around the globe that actually use the product. So it's a solid way to do something that actually has a meaningful impact in a very, very broad way. They understand complex structures and hierarchy, like I was talking about earlier, remembering construct of how to write and get code to actually do what you want it to do, and where is that mysterious semicolon that's breaking my code. I'm endlessly jealous of that. You guys are awesome for that. And then not to mention street cred, right? I mean, if somebody says they're a developer, there's some stereotypes that go along with that. Be like, oh yeah, you're a nerd. No, like coding isn't the nerd thing anymore. Like it may have had that reputation back in the day, but like developers really are the people that are empowering the future at this point. And it doesn't mean you're sitting around in a chair, in a dark room with the glow of the screen on your face for 15 hours a day. That's not development at all. I mean, just if you look at how things have changed in the past, even just the shortest the past 5 years, development's gotten kind of glamorous, if that's a right way to say it, right? It's kind of it's an enviable job at this point. Like, and I'm actually having personal regret because I didn't. What?
You talked about this glamour thing. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about.
So what does a day look like? Anna, I am going to turn it over to you and let you do some chatting.
Yeah. So a typical day, and this is just kind of like generic. Obviously, there's days where you do things like you get in earlier than you normally do, and you sit around a table with really cool people and help with the webcast. But unfortunately, that's not every day.
This is no earlier than you normally get in at 10:30?
I mean, when we start, I got here at 9:40 today. That's not bad.
If this was not Livecast, I would do a colorful gesture toward you right now.
Yeah. Well, so sometimes I'll work from home in the morning. So anyway, code. So that's one of the main things. So maybe you work on features, maybe you work on bug fixes, maybe you write tests, maybe you prototype something as proof of concept to show your team members something that you can do down the line. So there's some people who maybe will skew towards one side or the other. Maybe they'll do more testing, maybe they'll do more feature design, maybe they do a lot more architecture and design. But from me, that's kind of how things tend to go. And then from there, you have meetings. Like, we actually talk with people quite a bit. You don't just hold yourself up inside your office and write code for 10 hours and then leave. There's a lot of meetings, like whether it's with your teams to design features or other devs to actually talk about how you're gonna like write the code when you approach the problem. Code reviews, I don't know about like you guys, but that's tends to be a decent sized chunk of the day. That's basically looking over other team members' code or making iterations on your own code that other people looked at. Kind of like reviewing a paper that you're writing for like an English class. And then from there, like sometimes there's fun stuff like this, or our team will have like get-togethers so that people get to know each other a little bit better. Grab coffee in the mornings and hang out.
It's all fun stuff, Anna.
Yeah, it's
Mostly.
all fun stuff. That's so true.
So let's talk about the road to developing, right? So like, what is the actual path to becoming a developer? I will say this, like, and I'm gonna throw a little personal anecdote in here, right? Like, I remember being in high school in 10th grade and doing programming. I call it programming because it's nothing like what programming happens now, especially not here at Microsoft. I remember typing into BASIC back in the day, right? It wasn't C# or C++ or any of the new fancy languages that have come out. It was like old school BASIC, where it's like line number 10, 20, 30, 40, like it's ridiculous. And the very first thing I ever wrote was a program to help figure out which college you should go to. And of course it was all completely biased, and of course, you know, I made fun of some colleges and other colleges were awesome, but it was interesting being able to type in random sentences and then tell this thing to execute, and all of a sudden it's...
Dun, dun, dun.
I know,
Someone forgot to put in quiet hours.
Thanks, Brett.
You mean focus assist?
Focus assist, sir. He goes to check the name before he presents it at Bill.
On my build right now.
That means you're not running RS4.
RS4.
On my desktop it is, but not this.
Client.
I know.
RS4 is yesterday's build.
That's worse.
I have a virtual machine on here that is running it.
I don't know if that.
I feel like I'm about ready to get beat down.
The usual excuse.
Oh my goodness.
I need a machine
You were
to
talking a
gut
little bit about
check
your
with
personal history
public
with
and
coding.
not.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to chime in. My first dabble with coding was when I was in 6th grade, and the school bought an educational version of Visual Studio, or Visual Basic at the time, and I made a clock app, and it was awesome. And ever since then, I've always been fascinated with, like, because like you build things. Like, I built this use code to build this thing that does something on a PC, and that just to me kind of. And every time I dabble in it, I get excited. I built something, but then it crashes the PC, and then I give up.
Magic.
Yeah, the magic backfires on me. So.
But to use a current example, the Flight Hub.
Yeah, so Flight Hub. So the school didn't continue with the Visual Basic program when I was younger, so I took it upon myself to learn, HTML skills to make websites, and I really love doing that. And so I applied that to Flight Hub, to creating this website for insiders to check up the latest builds. I did it all manually using Visual Studio Code. I just went in and built this website. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So obviously, as you can see from the slide it's going to be popping up here in a second, not everybody's path is the same to, coming into coding, right? A lot of it depends on the person, the way they learn, their background, how much time they have to devote to it. Is it something they are studying in high school or potentially in college/university? Is it something you're doing as a side, as Donna would say, as a side hustle, right? Like, I have a full-time job here at Microsoft, but I'm still trying to learn some basic coding stuff. So either I'm doing it at home in my personal time, I'm doing it, as I'm winding down in the evening, using it as something to make me tired before I go to sleep, which is not the best time to learn, by the way. Or I dedicate some work time to expanding my work-related skills. But one of the things that's super important on this slide.
Do you do that after you finish a project? Like, yeah.
No, but you got to do that.
Brandon, let's find out. Does he do that? Do you have like a small mirror where you
No.
Hey,
Do you
it
double
works.
gun it occasionally?
Yeah.
Only on the really good ones. I'd be like,
Oh.
yeah. Not everybody at Microsoft that's a dev has a degree in computer science. They're-
I have a slide book or a college degree is what it's supposed to say. This was my bad. So I just wanted to clarify, like, not everyone that works here went to college. There's a lot of different paths to computer science. So if it is your passion, don't let anything limit you. Thanks.
Yeah, well, and then there's the LEAP program, which we actually have in a slide later. So,
But even on this kind of topic, it's like whatever path you go down, your education never stops. You're always learning new stuff. So there's always new languages, there's new technologies, new methodology, new ways to solve the same problem. I mean, that's what makes programming amazing. Is if we gave the same the same question to all of us in this room, all of us would have different answers that hopefully would produce the same result.
Some of them would be right.
Some of them would be right, others may be wrong, but then also you have to, like, how robust and error-proof is it? Like, you can have something very quick and easy, but if someone puts in an incorrect input, the entire thing blows up. Or you can make it very robust, but then it becomes a lot more complex because you're adding in the robustness. And then there's even ways to, aid in your robustness because you're using proper and different tools. So, like, I know Jill worked on Windows, and now she's working on IoT goodness toys. So
That's the name.
IoT
Not
goodness
the name.
toys.
But
But
That's the
like,
code name.
like that entire thing is learning a totally new skill set. I mean, you have to think totally differently when you go from client to that kind of style.
And going off that too, like you were saying, if you asked all of us a question, we would all have different answers. But like that kind of goes into like the meetings that you might have around like dev design reviews and stuff. Like if you asked all of us the question and we all put in our ideas, we might actually like have something that worked, and you thought of those cases and you thought of those cases, and like together it'd be a lot more robust than if just one person did it.
Yeah, a lot of it's like,
most of the time.
I would say we learn through failure. Like development, like I always joke, like failure is always an option. If you're gonna fail early, fail fast, and then keep on that iteration path, because then you're learning, you're making your code more robust, you're making the solution more robust, and hopefully you're not going to repeat the same mistake.
Yeah.
And then by working together as a team, I may have had a serious issue, and like Stacy may have not seen it, and during a code review I could be like, whoa, before you do that, check this thing, otherwise this horrible thing will happen. That's never happened. She does that to me. But
She's just got the grin on her face. She's like,
but that's kind of a great example of working in a team and having people from all different types of backgrounds makes you a stronger team.
So one of the interesting things about the development process, right, is we're going to jump into the concept of like the tools and the environment, right? Brandon, a minute ago you mentioned Visual Studio or whatnot. And I'm going to point back to you, and I'm actually going to let you cover this piece as well.
Ooh.
Because, fun stuff.
Awesome. Okay, so how does coding get done? So not every project is the same. If you went around the table, maybe we could even do that at some point, but like asked us what languages and stuff we all worked in and what kind of tools we use day to day, it's probably very different. So if you're starting a project from scratch, which at least in my team does not happen super often, you might take a different approach than if you're adding on to existing code, because maybe some decisions were made previously that you're kind of continuing with for now, even if you plan to migrate it to something newer in the future. It also depends on if you want to do an app for a specific platform. So for example, the Feedback Hub is a UWP app on Windows 10, but if you wanted to make a website, you might use different tools. So when you get started, you want to decide like, what are you going to be making your project for, whether it's a certain OS or web, and then that might define what tools you want to use. So like for C#, I tend to use Visual Studio a lot because there's a lot of tools that can help you out. But I know for web, a lot of people, like Brandon said, use VS Code, and then they install different add-ons, because that's just a lot more of a lightweight IDE for you to use. Do we want to do that? Like talk about what languages and stuff we use day to day? Do we have time? Is that fine?
No, I think
Okay.
we're good on time. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start. I mostly, at least right now, like yesterday, was writing C#, and I mostly use Visual Studio. I write some XAML, and then every once in a while I'll write some web code, but kind of working on two things at once. So.
For me, it's primarily right now UWP, XAML, and C#, and then whatever randomness is needed for Template Studio to talk to Visual Studio, and then different like PowerShell scripts and stuff to get our build process to work. But a lot of it is also just being able to read different languages to figure out a solution. So if something is in C++, I may not be able to code it anymore, but I know enough to read it and then be able to move backwards in time, or transcode it to what I need. If that makes sense. You're looking at me like I'm talking crazy.
No. It posed an interesting question in my head. Like if you look at just like human languages, right? Sometimes if you know one language, you won't necessarily know a second language, but you can piece together because some words sound similar, the sentence constructs may be the same.
I could give
it sounds like in coding,
I could give you C# that would actually be able to compile or could be able to execute in JavaScript. It would look almost exactly the same, but how you format it is different. C++ you have to deal with memory pointers and references, and just the syntax looks slightly different. PowerShell has its own kind of beast, I guess, almost. But you look at it, you're like, okay, I know enough of how to do it to get going and start working with it. Like Java is the same way. You look at it, you're like, oh, it looks very similar to C#. You're gonna feel some pain coding it.
It's easier to read
realize-
than to write.
Yeah.
It's easier to read it differently.
It's like it's muscle memory. Like I've been coding in C# for a long time, so my muscle memory for C# is much more strong than if you said, Clint, go try a new language. I will be doing C# style mistakes in that language because it's inherent to me.
Okay.
And then different languages have different styles. So like Java, it's like the spaces versus tabs argument. Like Java has the curly braces on the same line. I think C++, C style languages all have it on the line below. I'm looking at Peter because he's
It's
the
a
knower
religious
of all
war.
things.
And all gets compiled and
The
run.
compiler doesn't care. It's how it's the humans
What's
that
really
care.
funny, there was a photo on Twitter the other day of somebody that says people doing it right and then monsters, and one of them had the bracket on the same line and the next one had it on the next line, and there was an argument back and forth.
Steven Sinofsky had that, or at least retweeted it. I know that because I saw that.
Yes,
But,
that's exactly. And so I saw that and I was like, that's some sort of a dev thing that I don't totally understand, but it's kind of funny just because of the passion of the people that were responding.
But it's
like they were
style.
like hardcore
It's
about
style
what they
and the language, different choices that all make a difference. So like each team will have a different set of coding standards. So then when the hope is if we're all part of the same team, that code base looks like one person wrote it.
Yeah, and then when you're starting a new team, then you get to have those discussions in your code reviews, which is super fun. Because then there's like 90 comments about which way you want to do your bracket. and
Sounds like
things
you're
and
speaking
stuff.
from experience.
Yeah, that's the fun part about starting new stuff is you get to set your own path forward.
And then make other people conform to your.
Yeah, and then it makes it look like you have a lot of activity on GitHub because you've just been arguing about nasty versus spaces the whole time.
I had 10,000
But then
posts.
going back to the tools, tools then you can start enforcing these rules. So before they even get to a code review, you've run an analyzer and it's like, no, you're doing something naughty, and then it gets to a standardized.
Those are great because then the tools can yell at you without maintaining your relationships with your teammates.
Yeah.
Really, it's for team preservation.
So, what about you?
Yeah, I'm probably the old boy in this room that I'm program manager, and since I work in Xamarin team, I do Xamarin and C# enough for me to be able to do work, but I'm mostly, my job is mostly working with the designers and making sure I'm kind of like in between dev to PM to design, and so I'm talking the human language, and my job is kind of read in between lines of what people want without them actually saying what they want, so that we can write it in our PM specs and then produce that.
But you still have to know enough about the languages themselves to try to translate it in a way that the product can be built correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
So
still have
like
to have
I've worked in different teams that have different languages. So every time I moved, I learned enough of that language to be able to do my job, but not enough to code something like Clint was saying with some language.
So every Friday there's a Fluent Design review where different teams show off what they've built. I'm lucky enough to be like, hey Clint, you get a cool kid pass, so I get to attend. And it's amazing to see like all the different things that they have to worry about. So it's different languages, accessibility issues, not just like high contrast, but hit points. You can go way more into this, Jakuza, but just watching and learning and sitting in there just makes you a better developer, because then you're like, I did not think about that. Like hard coding a color is a big no-no, because what happens if the person uses, like I said, high contrast? What happens if the person uses like a screen reader for different scenarios? Believe it or not, like being able to auto peer, looking at Peter because he knows
Why are
everything.
you looking at me?
I know everything.
Jagusa is the one who... Automation peers.
See?
Here you
use
just
the
dug your
automation
grave,
peer property, you can then allow like a thing like a screen reader to deep link into your application to be able to properly make it accessible. But at the same token, you can then use Appium and the WinApp driver to do automated unit tests on your application. So it's a win-win on most of these scenarios. It's not you're doing more work to make it accessible. You're making your work accessible so you can do less work. Because now you're adding in unit tests and making sure that it's just so robust it's not going to fail.
So what you're saying is being a developer is all about being lazy.
I do more work so I don't have to do more work.
We're getting some complaints about audio still.
Such as
sound quality is really lacking.
What is it
Yeah,
lacking?
yeah. What is it lacking? Give me some more details.
So going back into being a programmer,
Yeah.
getting feedback, like we have to drive in, and just because someone says this is, I don't like this thing. Oh, well, can you explain what you don't like? Is
Or
it
this
not
doesn't work.
Yeah,
I
Well,
get
that's
that.
the
This doesn't
worst.
work. And I'm like, okay, does it crash? Does it not do anything? Does it come up but have the wrong stuff on it?
Yeah. That's and then trying to figure out how do you position that in a way that is both useful for us as a developer, but you're not technically offending the person that you're asking the question to,
Yeah.
or making it so that they're enabled to be able to get you the logs or data that you need. It's shockingly a lot harder than it sounds, even
Yeah.
among developers. Like, I think we're probably the worst.
But this is why it's super important that people file good feedback in the feedback hub, not just like, this is broken, this isn't working, because the more like descriptive you are with better repro steps, the easier it is to fix.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
And like, it's not just repo steps; it's knowing exact builds. Like, are you using it? Or what language are you in? So it's like little things can make
but see,
all the difference.
Feedback Hub gets most of that for you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Because it's a UWP app. Sorry, we're coming full circle. I'm just answering someone's question.
It's a UWP app that's written in what language?
XAML.
Oh.
The C# and XAML.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I don't even have to give my
Passing
feedback
the
spiel
test.
this time like I do on every webcast because that just happened. So, thanks for saving me 5 minutes later. I appreciate it.
C++. Although, as a lead, I do more debugging than I do coding because I don't code full-time anymore, but I still do debugging enough to figure out, is this my team's problem? Is this somebody else's problem? It's always better when it's somebody else's problem, but you have to look at it to prove it one way or the other. So reading logs, looking at doing the debugger, that kind of thing.
I'm in the web world now, so it is crazy out there. There are languages for everything you want to do, but most commonly I'm using C#.net. We have a Java solution, and then on the UI side we're using React, which is in JavaScript. And then you can also use TypeScript, which is a way to provide types over JavaScript to make your life a little easier. Ultimately, it's all JavaScript. JavaScript's super handy in the web world. And then on top of that, we're using Docker containers. So we do a lot of scripts and writing scripts that will make your life easier. Scripts are pretty great.
Okay, so I'm just trying to answer someone in the chat. I'll come back to you.
I can keep going. Yeah, so the web world gets a little overwhelming because there are so many options.
Yeah.
And so my advice for anyone trying to get into web development is just pick something and learn one thing that seems like it's maybe trending. There's a lot of resources out there, like tutorials. And once you learn kind of one setup for whatever web solutions you're trying to build, it gets a little easier to learn the next thing. You start to learn the nuances and trade-offs between your tech decisions. So a lot of times we'll build a table when we're trying to make those decisions on here are customer requirements, and here are the things that these platforms will provide us, and like the pros and cons. And ultimately you pick something and hope for the best.
Hey, thank you for sending me that joke. So like Chigusa, I'm also a program manager. I'm not actually a developer, but I do a lot of very small projects. Usually either C# or C++, because we're helping our customers. Like, oh, I have this problem with API foo, and so I write like a 10-line or 100-line program to show them how to use foo, or Stack Overflow. People are like, oh, we can't get this API to work, and so what language are they using? Oh, they're using C++. Let's write a C++ answer. Using C#, let's write a C# answer. I use Snap in a lot with my students in TEAL. Snap is one of these block-based languages where instead of like typing braces and semicolons and variable names and stuff like that, where you can make syntax errors, it's kind of like Lego. You just drag and drop blocks, so it's essentially impossible to make syntax errors. You can make logic errors all you want. That's a really good language for people that are learning, so they can learn about the structure of the language and not worry about syntax and all the things Clint was talking about. And for many years, I was a JavaScript programmer. I actually joined Microsoft to be the PM for the JavaScript language way back in the day. So a long time ago, I had very great fondness in my heart for JavaScript. It kind of died off a little bit. I'm sorry.
So all this brings up a really interesting point about what tools to use. But at the same point in time, like somebody like me who is not a professional coder, I don't do this for a living. It's like, what language am I even supposed to learn? Like, for me, there's been two big things that, and I was having a sad discussion earlier. It seems overwhelming because number one, I don't know what language I should start with, and number two, I don't even know where I should start typing. Like, I don't just walk up and open, it's not like you open an email and just start typing or anything right there. I guess technically you can open Notepad and just start, if you know the language, you can start, writing it there and then, push it to somewhere else.
Yeah, I did my first programming class in something called gedit, which was basically Notepad. And I wish I knew about more tools then, because it made it very easy to get zeros if you were missing a semicolon.
So, I think the big thing there is, what do you want to build? It's not what tool, it's what do you want to do. Because the tools and what things you pick are directly dependent on what you want to do. So like if you said, I'm building a house, you're not going to have a bunch of fine woodworking tools.
Yeah.
Now if you said you're going to build a decorative box, you may have fine woodworking tools there. You're not going to bring a sledgehammer to that.
Sure.
So I think that's the big thing, and I think one thing I know way back in the day when I was in school was I wish they would have taught us more of the tools and things like source control. Like I remember it was college before someone showed me a debugger, and literally I remember the professor put a breakpoint on, and he was I think one of the few actual professional programmers that I had as a professor. Put a breakpoint, my mind was like. When I was like, wait, what? The program stopped? Like, what's going on here? He's inspecting memory. Like, Jill's cracking up, but like, we think that for
just print everything. Just print it all.
That's how
I did it.
That's
and
how
then
I
the
did it.
second that you don't have to do that, you're just like, you mean I don't have to print out every single line?
And then what's even scarier with doing that is when you remove all your print statements, you accidentally delete something or leave something in that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So then now you're shipping potentially production code with bad things in there. We had, before I joined Microsoft at a startup, there was a developer that had a sleep statement for 5 seconds in this one thing. And we're like, why is this area of code always timing out? And it took better part of I think a week for someone to figure, because we were looking at production logs before we actually could go into the code. We finally figured out like there's a sleep statement in here. Like who put a sleep statement in here? And it turns out it was for debugging purposes.
Anyways, don't be afraid. Start simple. That there's nothing wrong with starting simple if you're just trying to learn, or even if you're trying to prototype something, just doesn't hurt to just keep it simple, but also keep in mind what your end goal is. Because I think a lot of people lose touch with like, why am I building this thing? It's always important to go back to the customer and think about what they need.
And you don't need to know everything. Like, you don't need to have an answer to all those things on the slide before you can start something. Like, wait until you have a need before going and learning something. I mean, it depends on your learning style. Some people, they really like going pretty deep before they actually go do it, whereas I'm a go do it and then learn it as I need it person. But.
Yeah, I'm in the same bucket. I learned by actually getting my hands onto it, which is why it was like when I picked a language to start with, everyone's like, JavaScript, super easy. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what's the easiest way I can start learning it? It was like these self-guided tutorials. I happened to pick Code Academy. It's just like, oh, JavaScript 101 type thing. Okay, type this. Print the console. I'm like, oh, and it just starts spitting out the results automatically on the right side. I'm like, oh, so you do this and it does this. Okay, and so it's like I start walking through it and I see the results of what I'm actually doing, and for me it helps it stick. And like, I mean, obviously I've got a long way to go, but just like some of this foundational stuff that helps build the confidence of, okay, I understand this construct and what it's going to do now. And then as you just start layering on from there.
Well, it's like cooking. You're not going to learn cooking by like reading a cookbook. Like it might help, but like if stuff's on fire, you're going to learn a lot faster. Like, don't do that again. And like, you're not going to set your computer on fire. It'll be fine. But like, learning by doing is the best way.
I've set my computer on fire.
You have.
What? Switching a monochrome video card, which we used to use for debugging, which is how old I am, from one machine to a new machine, and apparently I bent the pin slightly putting it into the new machine, so I turned on the new machine and smoke came out.
Chances are.
See, this is why I don't do hardware! Because I'm clearly not competent.
I could almost beat that. Building before this is actually what got me hired on at Microsoft was I built a computer controlled disco dance floor right after college, and then I had built the floor and I had one small little bit of wiring that I didn't see it, but one little strand of a copper wire went over and touched I think the ground for my USB.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah, and I plugged it into my fairly new high-end Lenovo, or at the time IBM ThinkPad.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you just see a little puff of blue smoke come out. And I was like, oh.
Nobody wants to see the magic smoke.
This is why you stay in the hardware realm. Although, you know.
My roommate at the
IoT
time,
sounds
literally,
cheaper.
he was technical enough where he's like, you need to go to the bar now, don't you? And I'll buy you a drink. I'm like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, this just got expensive.
It just got real expensive.
So, like, the premise of what we've been talking about, I mean, obviously, besides picking environment and things like that, is like taking an idea, then turning it into code, and then obviously, you transform your code into the reality that you are wanting to create from the idea itself, right? So, like, just a basic diagram to talk about the flow itself is there's an idea, and you iterate on your idea, right? Because you don't want to just say, oh, I'm going to go do something random that's not going to have any meaningful impact. It's something that you individually want to accomplish, or if you're in a work environment, it's something that your team or the company at large is trying to do, and actually, either enhance their product or change the world, or whatever the scenario may be, right? Obviously, you're going to spend some time planning your work. How long do you think it's going to take you? How many people are going to be involved, whether it's an entire team or just yourself? And there's the actual development process where you're writing the code, you're testing the code, you're going through your various iterations. And then, as Anna has mentioned several times, the whole code review process, which we'll actually jump into a little more deeply in the next slide, where you actually have others. Like if you're internal Microsoft, right, you'll have others on your team, review your code, make sure that it's as simple as needs to be or as complicated as it needs to be. Hopefully, the former of those two. But to make sure that it works, it's going to accomplish the right things, to make sure that you're not affecting other areas of the product that you shouldn't be affecting. That's one of the fun things about chasing down bugs is one team makes a change that has unintended consequences further down the line. And I'll lead into a blog post that I'm writing, but I'll talk about that later. And then, like, the actual integration process, right? This is like after your code has been peer approved and finished, you actually go and push it in so that it can get rolled into what we call main, right? These like the kind of the master build of Windows. And then, of course, it goes through, if you think about the slide that I presented at the beginning, with the kind of the circular logic of how the actual development cycle works. It goes into ES, they build Windows, then it gets flighted, gets deployed out to your machines, so on and so forth, and then we end up in this virtuous cycle where it just continues on and on, like this wheel just keeps rolling incessantly. So, code review, right? This is obviously not my area of expertise, so who wants to tackle this one? I'll just throw this ball up in the air and somebody can grab it.
Everyone needs feedback all the time. I think feedback is really important. You learn a lot from getting different people's perspectives, and this is where the team mentality of software development really comes to life. And in open source projects, you can get code reviews from people across the globe. So I think it's really an important learning process to learn from other people and how they would solve problems, to be able to answer their questions, and maybe they ask a question that you didn't think about. Like, oh man, that really changes the way that I would approach this. Gets back to that whole development process of, why are you building that thing? And it's this process where, you put your code out there, you say, I'm ready, I think this thing is ready, please tell me if I missed anything, tell me what I should be rethinking. And you iterate over those questions that people are asking you. Sometimes you we'll give them an answer or tell them like, I won't fix this, I'm going to do it a different PR. Totally okay to do. But you kind of got to know the people you're working with. But, you know, even the most senior people, you learn so much by reviewing their code, and sometimes you'll catch something that they hadn't thought about too. So I think everybody needs feedback.
And a PR is?
A pull request, that is where you have your code and you are ready to merge it back in with the main project.
So that's a very GitHub or Git concept.
Yeah,
of-
it is. Yes. Would you have other terminology you'd like to share?
I would say you want to merge one bit of code into the primary bit is of what a pull request is, would be simplifying it. So I think one big thing that I think all of us tend to do is think in terms of source control. So there's always, you know, like here's the gold master bit of source code, and your job is to merge it in and tweak and alter it and adjust it. And you have basically a copy of that code, which is called a branch or a fork, depending on how you are using your different types of source control. So I think our big thing is we don't like creating copies of the source code, like Control-C, Control-V, Control-C, Control-V, because which is the source of truth? Instead, there are systems like GitHub that do this.
The other good thing about code reviewing, in addition to people finding problems, they can tell you whether it's readable. Because you can have code that executes 100% correctly, but other devs need to be able to read it, because somebody will have to touch it someday, right? And if it's not readable, it doesn't matter how correct it is, because the person who has to go and add some new feature to it or fix some bug 2 years after you've left the team has to be able to understand what it's doing. So.
And it's not even just that. Also, it's you remembering why you did.
Or
something.
you look at it a year later and you're like, man, I got nothing here.
Like, I did this clever thing for a reason.
Yeah.
Oh, crap, I don't remember.
I mean, it sounds like an exact example of what we were talking about earlier. If you give everybody at the table the same project, and you're going to get, 6, 7, 8 different answers, and all of a sudden it's like, I'll wake back up. Sorry. Oh, I love technology sometimes. Computer went to sleep.
But yeah.
That same type of thing. Yeah.
And that's the great thing about code reviews, and like when you do open source projects, by saying here's my solution to this thing, then you can review it. And like design stuff does the exact same thing. Like, do you want to talk about like going from here's a concept of a control to actual, like, you hand it off? Do you feel that's about the same, Chikuza?
Yeah, so like code review is almost in the PM terms a spec review. So we, the PM, write what the code should be, like what we are producing, like who is our audience, what does this do, and why is it important, and this is what it should do. And then we sit down with the developers, designers, everybody who is dedicating their effort to, and make sure that we have I have understood everybody the right way, so that when the developers start writing a code, it's doing exactly what we intend for that to do. So to me, the spec review is like making sure that I understood everybody, so that I'm writing it and we're reviewing it, and make sure my interpretation is not incorrect. That's how I see my spec review to be.
And we jumped straight to code review, but you had that sequence of like ideas, planning, coding, etc. And I pasted a link into the chat a bit earlier if you want to click on that. But basically, it's about the relative cost to fix a bug at different times in the process. So if people look in the chat, I posted a URL. I'm looking at the picture right now. But basically, it says the sooner that you discover a bug, whether it's in the design phase, like am I even building the right product, versus the coding phase, I did a greater than instead of than and equals, to the testing, to the production, and then people actually using it. The sooner you find a bug, the cheaper it is to fix it, and the fewer ramifications there are. So don't skip the idea phase, and don't skip the planning phase. don't skip development either.
I would actually make like you say, idea and you're iterating, but the key thing there is you're doing a spec review. You're bringing that idea to the table, and it's not just PMs are there. Like, Stacy, you've been in spec reviews. I'm assuming.
I say things like, that sounds too hard. Can you have ideas on what you're going to do?
There's too much magic that you're asking for.
Do you want to wait 3 years? Because if not, let's come up with something easier.
But that then goes to the planning as well, because you're like, hey, we thought of this crazy thing, and then you're like, well, that's going to take 4 years to do it. What's your MVP, minimal viable product, to build this item out? So by having everyone, testing, being sure the developers are there, being sure that marketing is on board as well, because what you build will have to be, publicized somehow. All those little things start adding up, and it's easier to, basically figure out, is there an issue early than later? Because going back to fail early, fail fast.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, there might be multiple ways to solve the same problem. As long as we understand what the problem we are solving, there are ways, cheaper ways and more expensive ways. And that's where we can debate or decide and discuss which is the right way.
Yeah. And I mean, to really hit home the point of the cost, right? It comes down, like, for Windows as an OS, a lot of it comes down to the cost and customer perception. Because if we ship a product that is completely full of bugs and destroys a user's experience, or won't install, or corrupts all their settings, or eats their documents, right? Like, the cost to us as a business, like, I know I'm getting into the financial side of it, right? Like, it can be huge. And it may impact one person who then tells 10 people, who then tell 100 people, right? It kind of spreads that way. Which is one of the really important things about having the insider program is, getting builds in front of people. I mean, obviously we do tons and tons of testing internally. We've talked about a lot of that through some of the previous webcasts. But, having insiders go through and look at the changes that we're making and how it's going to affect their individual workflows. Then if you look for, like, the business efforts where enterprises are testing out the preview builds of what's coming out next, and they give us feedback on, hey, this is going to affect my business this way because you've made X change and now it's breaking this particular process, right? It could be unintended consequences on our part, changes that people need to adapt to. Like, there's all kinds of different scenarios that can come out. But again, there's always a cost to every change that goes on. So obviously, there's some stuff we want to present and share. Some really cool things that folks here that are have come to present today. Some little demos and some showy, fancy stuff that we want to show off of some work that's been done internally. First up on the docket is Jill with some Azure IoT stuff. Do you need to display from your machine?
I think I have a slide that pretty much covers most of it.
'Kay.
So
There you go.
there are some GitHub repos listed there. So as I mentioned, what I work on in Azure IT is open source. Currently, we're working on remote monitoring, which is listed there. The idea is companies are trying to come into the digital age, so we call it, bringing people more into technology, using data, using these devices that can go pretty much anywhere now. You can put them on your car, you can put them on a window, you could put them in light bulbs, just about anything you could think of. You could have a sensor that's pulling data, but what are you going to do with it? So this is the whole concept of the Internet of Things. It's an intentionally vague name. It can be anything. And we would like to help people figure out how to make sense of all of these numbers coming in. So you have 1,000 temperature data points coming in at you. What are you going to do with it? What does that mean to you? How does that help you? The scenario that I like to paint, maybe not realistic, but delicious, is you have a fleet of ice cream trucks. You want to get ice cream to people. People love ice cream. You want to make sure that ice cream's not going to melt. So you have a temperature sensor in your trucks. You know where your trucks are so that you can make sure your delivery's on time. And this is our dashboard that we have for our remote monitoring pre-configured solution, which is all open source. So if you find that you are someone that has a business that has a fleet of ice cream trucks, you too can monitor your trucks with our solution. And it's all about bringing these concepts, making them easier so that in the web world you have all of these tech decisions to make. And it can take a really long time to build out your own solution. And we'd like to give you some code to get started for your business, for for your engineering team, maybe you have a small engineering team, to start to use some of our APIs and our tech solutions and tech decisions right off the bat. So that's what we do. The exciting and scary part about it is it's all online. So every line of code you make, every bug that you accidentally wrote, every comment you make is all public, which you really start to embrace over time and learn from that experience and get really excited about, we get all this feedback from Feedback Hub on GitHub as well. It's right there. You can respond to it. You can directly link your code to say, hey, I'm fixing your issue right now as we speak. It's a really tight relationship with our customers, which is really great. So that's it.
Awesome.
You two can monitor your ice cream.
Yeah.
You're getting a bunch of smiley faces from that one. That's
I love ice cream, so that's usually what I use. Might not be as realistic, but please tell me if you're an ice cream person.
Ice cream exists?
Yeah.
What do you mean that's not
Yeah.
realistic? You
That's
don't want
true.
your ice cream with milk?
You don't want your ice cream to melt.
Brandy, you should start a poll on how many people actually like ice cream, just for the giggles of it. I'm curious, just for funsies. So, Facey, I got something for you.
All right. I do need to project. Let me switch.
Okay. So I'm flashing this up just so it's part of the video that will be displayed so that people can grab the links or whatnot.
Yeah, so that first link is basically the actual walkthrough that a colleague of mine has written up. So the technology has been in, it's not brand new, it's been there for a little bit, but my colleague just did this excellent walkthrough, and so I wanted to give it a little buzz. And then he also has the sample app in the store, and the walkthrough also has a pointer to GitHub where the source is.
Awesome. So I will say in advance, in the past when we have shifted demo machines like this, the unit that we use has, I'll just say it has gotten upset a little bit. So if for some reason the video of the stream drops, I will have it back up and running as quickly as possible. So hold tight.
And who is it that's saying they don't like ice cream? Really?
Oh, wow.
There's actually people saying
Wow.
I think we've just broken Jill.
Because I know people that are lactose intolerant that still like ice cream.
There are other options.
They'll eat ice cream and accept the after effects.
Does it have to have dairy?
All right, now the question is
Is it
this
going to
gonna
do what
work?
I need it to do?
Like turkey
Yes!
bacon,
Ooh.
turkey bacon,
Yes!
really bacon.
Yeah.
And I think I've turned off everything, so hopefully nothing embarrassing will come through, you know. All right, so most of what I do is about taking existing Win32 apps and wrapping them up in the desktop bridge so that they can go in the store. This is almost the opposite of that. So this is, you have a universal app. It's great, it works, but there's one thing that if you knew you were on desktop, you could do a desktop specific thing, which by definition isn't universal. And so this is going to show you how to do that. So in this case, this is a universal app here. And then when I click on this button, one hopes that it will work. It worked earlier today. That's popping up the console window, which is a desktop only thing, and saying that this part of it, this is a separate process, is running basically with greater privileges because it's a full trust app. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how this happens. The much more detail is covered in the links that I pointed to, but I'm going to bring
So
it.
really quick,
Yeah.
so you were talking about doing UWP development, and
Yep.
then you said, hey, I can, doing desktop only stuff
Yep.
is not. I think it's more about, I want to do something that is not in the UWP
Yeah,
API.
Well, it
Because
could, it could be either, right? It could be either something that literally just doesn't exist elsewhere, or because there's lots of stuff on desktop that is only on the desktop SKU, or it could be something that exists but because of the security model is
So,
not in the API.
We're basically creating a desktop, Windows desktop application that then, where your front end is a UWP, and now you want to, right here, you're launching a process.
Yep.
So we're breaking out of the UWP sandbox.
Yes. So here's the Visual Studio project. So there's 3 pieces to the project. There's the UWP project down here. Let's see, am I on that? Yes. So here's here's my main page of this, and you can see that on the button click, I check whether this API contract is present, and it's the full trust app contract. And if that's present, then I call launch full trust process for the current app, basically. So over here, I have the full trust project up the top here, and that is just a standard C# console app right now. Just prints out some stuff. And then the way that it gets put together is this packaging project. And if you go to the manifest for that, you see this is mostly a standard UWP manifest. You have your application, etc. And then down here, I'm going to highlight it. You have an extension which says, I have an extension to this app that is a desktop extension that is this executable. So that is the short and sweet. There's more examples on the walkthrough, and in addition, there's more complicated things like sending parameters back and forth between your UWP app and the full trust piece. And I encourage you to go look at it if you're a developer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was those links that were displayed earlier, which are, if you need them, they will be available in the video on demand after the fact. And, of course, the presentation that I actually have here, because there are a ton of links, especially in the end. I'll just call it the appendix. It's just a separate section. There are a ton of links that you can review at your own leisure, so I will make sure and get this published out. I'll throw it on OneDrive and create a short link, and then I will message that out so folks can go and check it out.
And a shout out to Stefan Wick, who did all the hard work on that. I just presented it.
So next up, let's talk a little bit about Fluent, huh?
Okay.
All right. Which adapter do you need?
I need the mini one.
It'll be this one. So which
That works.
Oh,
this one? Okay. All right. We're going for another changeover. Fingers crossed here. I'm telling you, it was so spectacular the first time we tried to jump between PCs, and it was several iterations ago of software, both between
Bad
Windows
things
and
happen.
between the actual hardware that we use, and it just went and just crashed, and the whole stream went down. It was a glorious dumpster fire.
That's an exciting part of live streaming.
Absolutely. And it looks like yes, fantastic.
Nice.
All right, we're
Twice
two-
in a row.
we're
Ship
two for
it.
two.
Yeah.
I think they
Okay,
did.
so I wanted to point out few of the tools that you have at your fingertips from Fluent, just in case you are not aware. So we do a lot of work to make sure that we're not only producing the system, but you have guidance and tools that you can use. So one page that you should remember is fluent.microsoft.com. So this page was recently updated to make sure that the messagings were up to date. So anytime there is any update to the message that we have, we will be updating this page. So Fluent is a design system that we want to make sure we are following the principles. So we have 3 principles: natural on each device, intuitive and powerful, and engaging and immersive. So these are the principles that whatever controls and patterns that we ship embodies. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is this is a link to our guidance documentation. So that was almost like a high-level document, but we have all those nitty-gritty of what exactly tools you have to use. So we have this landing page that talks to you about the high level and what kind of tools like if you want to learn about using Light, then it has link to review highlight. And we work design, PM, developer, everybody contribute to having those pages accurate and useful for you. So you should come here, and also at the bottom there is a way for you to give feedback, and we do take feedback very seriously. So if you have any feedback, please give us the feedback here. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that we publish this application called XAML Controls Gallery, and this app is basically what we work again, design PM and developer work together to release the same content that we have on the guidance document. So like I showed the acrylic, but then here you can experience the acrylic in the actual code and learn about it. And then also have the link back to the guidance. So play with it. There's a what's new section that tells you what it's coming out or it has come out. And give us feedback.
Awesome. So the question did pop up about the name of that application, which is XAML Controls Gallery.
Yeah.
So as soon as I switch back to inputs, and hopefully we can go 3 for 3 now that I'm coming back to the original machine. Keep your fingers crossed.
Yes.
I know, drum roll, right?
Yeah. Also, so open XAML Controls Gallery is also in GitHub, so it's you can see the code too.
Okay, so hold on. So this is in presentation mode. Let me put it. Oh, it's on extend. Let me go back to duplicate.
There you go.
There we go. Beautiful. I'm gonna have to from current slide. There we go, and that should give me what I want again.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, and if you,
It's almost like I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Almost.
if you go to one of those pages, there is a link to the GitHub, so you can get the code too.
Awesome. Yeah, and so the app that you had asked about, who was it that asked me in chat? Ayush 8. So that is the name of the app. If you jot down this link, or if you click it later after I've published the presentation, that'll take you directly to the store. It's a short link for the long link to the store that'll let you go and get that app. If you don't want to wait, it has been pasted in the chat already. There is the okay, perfect. All right, people doing my work for me. That's awesome. Thank you. And then next up, obviously, developing being one of the big things that we're focused on here at Microsoft. Let's talk a little bit about Build 2018. Build homepage, right? Dun, dun, dun.
Wait, you already said everything you were going to say.
no,
You'll
I-
have to come
Yeah,
up
you
with
totally,
new things.
yeah, you totally spoiled it this morning. It's like,
Did I?
like an
Wait,
hour.
But wait, there's more.
You let him, man.
I totally should have cut you off, man. I'm sorry.
Been like,
Hold on. So this is just a quick snapshot of the Build homepage, which I'll actually have the link on the next page. So let's actually talk a little bit about what Build is, what it represents. Clint, I put this slide together. I don't know if it fully represents the things that you want to talk about. I will run through it, and then you can just
sure.
have at
I'll
it.
happily interrupt you.
Yeah. So the link right here, Microsoft.com, and then of course your locale, which mine is obviously English US. Just whack Build. If you just look for Build 2018 on your search engine of choice, hopefully it's Bing. Wink, wink. You'll find the page and go and check it out. But obviously, it's the premier Microsoft event or conference, whatever you want to call it, for developers. It's a chance to meet and talk to Microsoft employees and executives. Obviously, there's big keynotes and then Q&A sessions and things like that. A lot of the teams share some of their product roadmap and things they'll be working on in the future, as well as some really cool things that they have done either publicly where we've made announcements or whatnot, or some things that kind of happen in private, and there's some really cool stories to tell on the back end of that. There's tons and tons of sessions. I know that's something you mentioned earlier. The attendees get to kind of build out their own schedule and figure out which products they want to go and hear more about, which features are super important to them or their companies. You build out your schedule, you attend the sessions, you meet other people that have similar interests as you. And it's not all just super hardcore coding type stuff, right? Some of it is intro level sessions. Some of it is, much further in depth. Hey, this is some of the coding stuff. This is some of the tools you'll need to use. There's kind of broad range of information presented depending on which session you attend. There's plenty of hands-on workshops, like there's actual presentations that you get to see Microsoft developers doing and showing the code off, as well as rooms that are literally just lined up with computers where you get to sit down and actually put hands-on and try some of the stuff. And it's kind of a guided interactive type session. As I mentioned earlier, it's a great chance to network with other attendees who have similar interests as you. It's always nice to meet more people that that you can network and connect with. And hey, some people have found jobs. I know people that attended, make the right connections, and some of them have actually ended up here. So always a good opportunity. And then of course, shameless self-plug, we're gonna have a Windows Insider booth. You can come by and say hi, which I'm going to shamelessly show off the shirt from last webcast, right? if you watch the Cortana webcast, the team kept saying it's important to us, and they threatened to have shirts made. No, I actually did have the shirts made, right? Windows Insider? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So if you happen to be going to build, come give the secret shake, the secret knock, secret handshake, whatever you want to call it. Come up to the booth and say it's important to me, and I'll have a shirt for you.
Cool. So yeah, at Build, the key thing here is it's not just the in-person experience. We have amazing things planned for in-person, but the theaters and the breakout sessions will be online later, roughly 24 hours with the PowerPoint. We're making sure that the source, if they show source code, that source code is also available so you can run it. So you talked about roadmap, and Build tends to be, what is coming. So it will be the next version after the Windows 10 1803 version. We'll be talking about the next upcoming version of Windows. And we'll talk, so for the Windows track, I can speak most into that. We'll be talking about MSIX, we'll be talking about Fluent, Ink, Microsoft Graph stuff, Activity Feed and Timeline, sets, Windows 10 on ARM and the ARM64 SDK, Windows subsystem for Linux and other things there, Windows machine learning. We'll talk about Xamarin. There's an entire track for stuff relating to Azure. We'll talk about mixed reality. There's just tons of stuff. And actually one of the cooler things that if you are attending that I highly suggest you do is we're doing an area called Tech Sneak Peeks. So this is us literally talking about a crazy idea we had and would love direct feedback. So I'll talk to my subject, Windows Template Studio. So we build basically your file new experience. We think we hit a lot of the scenarios that are needed, but we're not sure what kind of our next toys should be that we include in it. So, what would you guys want? Here's some ideas that we have. Let's go see what you guys think as a group. Do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? And there's other groups doing this as well. So it's going to be part of the session builder, and we'll talk about all those things there as well. If you miss one of them, you can go to a different one, so we're repeating them as well. But that is actually one of the things that you have to be in person for, just like a workshop. So you mentioned hands-on labs. They're actually instructor-led labs. Those you have to be in person for. We're working with the docs team to figure out how we can make them online. For Windows ones, you can imagine, hey, if I want to try out something that's in the next version of Windows, how do I do that when the builds aren't released yet for maybe some of the bits that we want to show off? So we're working with the docs team to figure out how we can best do that so that people can try it out.
Awesome.
So I will say, I always hate doing this because it seems like this happens with pretty much every webcast. I'm butting up close to the time here. So let me go ahead real quick. I know what we're going to do. We'll probably end up going a few minutes over. That's going to be my fault. Sorry, time management, right? But I did want to cover the developer resources real quick. From a Microsoft perspective, the easiest way to get to some of the core resources that we make available publicly are right here. So developer.microsoft.com. There's obviously MSDN, which is just msdn.microsoft.com. There is the MSDN forums, so created a short link there, so aka.ms, MSDN forums. The link to the actual Twitter account. The team's actually pretty good at responding to tweets, so if you want to get some direct interaction, drop them a message there. And then, of course, there is the LEAP program that was mentioned earlier today. So if you check out that, if you just want to look up Microsoft LEAP program, or you can click this link once this is available. There's a whole lot of goodness being done in that area for people who didn't necessarily start off in the computer science realm, didn't go to school for it, so to speak. Sounds like something I should look into.
Well, and I think if you're not a developer, just please ask. Like everyone, I love helping out. I think Peter, Anna, Jill, Stacy, Chikuza, like everyone loves to help out. Just remember that we also have jobs. So, our job is not to code your stuff. But yeah, like we want to help out. We love helping out and helping point the same way. But the more info you can help give us, we can, hopefully it's a, hey, use this API and the world will be solved for your problem.
Yeah.
I wish.
And then outside of that,
Semicolon.
right? Like, I mean, we as a company, obviously, we have a vested interest in, people using our platforms and products, so we make things available that help people connect into the environment that we've created, which is the broad Windows environment. But even outside of that, there is a ton of information available. This list doesn't even begin to scratch the surface on the information that is available. A ton of links on the left on learning to code. Again, the TEALS organization has been mentioned a few times there. That is in the list. Like I mentioned, Code Academy. That's where I'm taking the JavaScript stuff that I'm starting to work through. But the list goes on and on and on. And then some other things on the actual right side. So like getting work done. GitHub is a big repo for putting up code both privately and publicly. Licensing and all that stuff applies. You set it up accordingly. Bitbucket, Stack Overflow, great place to go ask questions. You get tips, tricks, hints. Hopefully you've heard of it by now. If you haven't, now you have. And then just at the bottom right there, code. It's a Wikipedia link, but it kind of gives you a broad overview of the kind of environment of source code hosting and different things that the wide variety of platforms offer. Okay, so that being said, let's jump into some Q&A, which I'll just leave this link up there while we're doing Q&A. So, Brandon, I know you have compiled some questions.
I have.
And if I will say this, I know just from time constraints, if anybody absolutely has to leave, I will be wholly respectful of that because I know that I'm running over. If you're available to stay a few extra minutes and go through some Q&A, I would wholly appreciate it. Your own schedule will dictate that. So if you're able to stay, thank you in advance. Brandon, fire away.
The first question that we got, actually, we had several that are pretty much the same. And the question is, will MSIX be talked about a little bit more in depth at Build?
Yes, there are, I believe, at least 2, if not 3 sessions.
Okay.
I will go 2.5 sessions that will talk about MSIX in depth.
Okay, cool.
Depending on one will cover if you're more of a dev person, one is more of an IT person, and then
Okay.
I think there will be a general overview session that will be talked about.
And then along those same lines, there was a specific question about MSIX where is the idea for it to be more complete than Click Once?
It has more features than Click Once now. It can do things like mandatory update. John Vinsel did a good talk on our application deployment at Ignite. John, I believe, is one of the presenters for the MSIX talk as well, and that will at Build, and they'll go much more into depth. This is technology that we've been working toward, and this is the next generation of our application deployment system that we can do quite a bit with. It's some really, really cool stuff.
Cool. Okay.
Awesome.
The next question is related to Fluent Design, and there were several questions asking about Fluent Design in websites. And
I knew that was coming.
so, I mean, if it's something we can don't need to talk about, we can say that.
I cannot speak
Just
to it.
if you can't say anything, just say it's important to us.
It's important to us.
There we go. It's
So-
important to us.
One thing that I will be talking about in the Build Speak is how we are influenced by the patterns that's existing in other platforms. So we are thinking about those designs. What I won't be able to talk about is with
Not
the
yet.
client.
Wait.
All right.
Okay. And I guess along those lines, will being able to use Fluent Design in PWAs be part of that?
Progressive web apps.
Yeah.
So one thing you can do in PWAs is wire up native Windows functionality through what you basically, I'm blanking on the exact term, but what you'd want to do is lazy load in all the Windows functionality. So if you wanted to do, let's say, a live tile, you'd use your service worker then to do a bunch of that stuff. But the key thing here is with the PWA, you do feature detection. Say, hey, I'm on the Windows, I'm an installed application that has access to these features, and then you can load it in. It's exactly what Twitter does right now with their PWA.
The next question is for the devs in the room, and do you prefer tabs or spaces?
Spaces.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully everything, all of your code, no matter what happens, gets compiled down to one or the other. So that's my democratic answer.
It's compiled down to something that doesn't care about tabs or spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
I go by whatever the coding standard is for the team, and then allow the tooling to handle it.
Yeah.
The more interesting question, though, is if you do spaces, how many?
Four.
Whoa.
Yes, it's true.
It depends on the
Spaces.
language.
Four.
Nice.
Yeah.
Unless you're on Twitter, then don't double space after punctuation.
Uh-huh.
That's actually a new standard. Depending on when you grew up, it's either 1 or 2.
See, I grew up in the double spacing era.
Same.
Yeah, me too. I've been trying to change, but it's hard.
Back to that.
There's the
muscle
finger
memory.
wag.
Yeah.
There is the finger wag, because I absolutely agree.
The next question is, will UWP support F#?
So.
Is it important to us?
So there are ways you can support F# now. The reason why you can't submit an application to the store is because store applications are compiled via .NET Native, and .NET Native does not support 1 or 2 critical items that are used in F#. I believe it's tail recursion is the reason why it won't work. I'm looking at Peter, the knower of all things.
I'm aware of this on a periphery, but yeah, tail call is the thing that doesn't.
So the other thing you can do is, if your app is not being submitted to the store, you can still do a release compile of the application, and do not select .NET Native, and then it will actually work. So you could use
Side
F#,
loading it.
but it's side loading. And if you do enterprise deployments, you actually could do this, I believe, as well. But the key thing is you have to work around .NET Native. I would say we have asked before, and we'll happily ask again. If you guys have scenarios that require F#, please send me them. cruckus@microsoft.com. I've asked a couple times, and there's only been one person that or there's 2 different companies that responded. One of them turned out to be Wunderlist, which we bought.
Thank you. Sorry, I got wrong.
Banner.
Couldn't like so MSIX isn't that the replacement for like the Microsoft installer, right? That's where
So MSI is kind of, I would say, the old school Win32 kind of installer.
Yeah.
Then for UWP, you have the file format APPX.
Yeah.
And now what we're doing is we're basically kind of saying, here is the packaging format that, one installer to rule them all.
So can you compile and create a UWP app in F# and then use MSI as an installer to install that app outside of the store?
Yeah, you can sideload.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm getting into
So
sorry.
we're being very. I'm being very cautious on my wording here, so then I don't break myself into jail.
Okay.
But yes, so you could, like I said, it's the same scenario where you have your UWP and you have your F# side project, and then that uses it. But that app, as soon as you add in F#, cannot enter the store currently because .NET Native is a store requirement.
So the last question that I have is more of a generic feedback question, and the question is, how can I get attention when I provide feedback regarding something that is not used a lot, or isn't a visible or easy way to describe, but is seriously impacting experience?
That is a super broad question. I don't know if that's developer specific. I could take a crack at answering it anyway. The best way to give us that type of scenario where it's the actual explanation of the problem itself needs to be a bit verbose is to just go put it in the answers form. Because you can put full long text in there with description of the scenario, how to repro it, the attempt to describe it, even though it may be hard to describe. Like you're not constrained by capacity on 240 characters on Twitter. You're not even constrained by the capacity of, I think it's like 2,000 characters within the feedback hub. You can write a novel in the answers form if you need to be, and break it up into multiple posts.
I've asked the person who actually asked that question to elaborate in the chat, so
All right.
Maybe they will.
So while we're waiting for that, any parting nuggets? Because we are absolutely over time,
So-
but again, thank you for staying.
So
anything you want to...
So going back to the F# thing, I kind of glanced at Peter and Stacy, you might want to chime in here. One thing you could do is do basically the trick with the extension,
Oh.
and then have the project be a desktop bridge with full trust, and then that would not require.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't need to do anything. You'd do it the other way around. You'd do it as an actual desktop bridge, and
Yeah, but I'm
just
saying
like
it
as
would, that
opposed
would
to
be
a
one way
UWP
to
with an extension,
potentially
but
do it
yeah.
is you'd basically do a desktop bridge application.
The,
potentially.
the main drawback to that though is that you wouldn't get fluent today. You wouldn't get any of the new sexy XAML. You wouldn't get fluent because you're a Win32 app.
Right.
So you can write RefSharp apps. You don't get any of Chigusa's wonderful UI.
You could, because
Well, if you did it the other way,
Yeah,
the
you
way
could do
where
the-
you have the
the
UWP
other way.
head,
Well,
and then you have the
you have
part
UWP
that
and then you have
actually
the
calls.
type.
But then
It
you've
just
got two
depends.
processes.
Yeah, it just depends what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
right?
It's a good summary of being a developer.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
It is.
going back to
It's-
the initial point. you get
Anytime
one
it's
person.
it's not officially supported. Okay, what horrible things can you do to get it to work? That is half of being a dev.
Oh.
But don't let that scare you.
It's all about being
It's a challenge.
clever.
Yeah.
What clever thing can I do to work around the problem?
Well, and how do you break down the problem into
Yeah.
smaller problems that become easier to solve?
So we got some more elaboration on that, the last question.
Multi-mode setting,
yeah.
different DPIs, file transfers. Yeah, that's something that you ping me on Twitter or drop a post in the answers forum, and it's something we can get into. It's definitely outside the scope of what we're talking about here, but I'm happy to try and help.
So, Brandon, what they're asking for is actually a developer-related feature. The teams have been talking about the not throwing up a prompt for the print dialogue in the UWP. The scenario is enterprise applications or an IoT application.
And we're looking into that one. So that one's a known.
So we switched topics, right?
Yeah.
Because we were
Yeah.
talking about. So it's okay. Which one are you answering?
I'm answering audibles, printing without a dialogue.
Okay.
So UWP currently can't. Peter has, believe it or not, when anyone touches the developer user voice, I do directly forward it back to the appropriate team, and then we.
How
try to
often is the
figure it out.
appropriate team, Peter?
Peter's going back to it's not what you know, it's who you know. Peter is one of those people that knows a ton of the direct contact people. I've
He
been
knows
doing
where
it
it really
much
goes
less
to.
because initially he was one of the people that I knew that could help direct me, but over the years now I've learned
You don't need
many
me
of those
anymore.
people. I still need you. There are still things I don't know.
But yes, in particular, two things about printing without a dialogue. One, we know it's a pain point. We are investigating what we can do there. Obviously, can't make any promises, but yes, we hear you. We know it's a problem. It's important to us. The second thing is Stefan Wick, the PM that Stacey mentioned earlier with the desktop bridge, has some samples of using the desktop bridge to do printing from a UWP, spinning up a full trust component to do printing. But just like everything else with the pros and cons and blah blah blah, there's two processes. The process that's printing knows about GDI, it doesn't know about XAML. The UI process knows about XAML, doesn't know about GDI. So like, it's good for printing images and things like that, but it's not very good for, hey, I want to print this nice XAML form that I have without a dialogue. So there are options today, depending on what you're trying to print, and we would love to make it better because it's very important to us. No promises though, sorry.
Stuff's complicated.
It is.
That's the answers to
But if it
everything.
wasn't, then we wouldn't have jobs.
No.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
I was just thinking, Clint, am I the Kevin Bacon of UWP?
You're
Yes.
probably like it would be like two
2
hops,
degrees.
3 hops.
Degrees of
it's
Peter.
not. It's not even 7. It's shorter than that. Is that all the questions, Brandon?
That's all the ones that I tracked early on.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you all for staying over and doing some Q&A and sharing your knowledge
Yeah.
and being just awesome presentations. I don't know. Hopefully, for all the insiders out there, hopefully you learned something along the way today. I know that I have, especially just in the process of arranging this and talking to folks. Like, I've definitely learned a few things. It's settled me some in making it a little less scary, just because of how much there is out there. Knowing that I don't have to have all the answers up front, it's going to make my journey a little bit easier. So
Jason has a one-on-one.
Thanks, Clay. I'm sitting here doing my closing monologue, and I'm just like, brack. So anyway, hopefully, for me, my journey will be a little bit easier. Hopefully this gives you some insights into whatever journey you may be undertaking, or even if you're an old school person, it gives you some insights into how we do some of the things around this place that we call Microsoft that we know and love so much. But thanks again. Next month in May, we'll be doing a webcast from Bill, and we will also be doing something special at the end of May that I haven't fully announced yet, but stay tuned. There's more to come. So
Wait,
until
there's more.
I know, right? But until next time, thank you all for attending. Cheers, and we will see you soon.